Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Confessions. You ever have a moment so unreal that you keep waiting for someone to yell cut, like you're on some hidden camera show? That was me 3 Saturdays ago. I was standing in the hallway outside the living room, holding a basket of laundry, listening to voices that didn't know I was there. My wife's voice was calm, too calm, like she was explaining how to tie your shoes. The kids were quiet, but I could hear their chairs scraping against the floor. And then she said it, clear as day. He's not your real dad. Glenn is. I froze. I don't even remember breathing. My son, he's 9, asked if I was going to be mad. My daughter, 11, said she'd known for a while but didn't want to hurt my feelings. My wife laughed softly, like this was some kind of tender family bonding moment. She didn't know I was behind the door until I stepped in. I didn't slam it open, didn't shout, just walked in with that laundry basket still in my arms, like I'd stumbled into the wrong house. She went pale for half a second, then put on that fake smile she uses at PTA meetings. "Oh, you heard that," she said. I didn't answer. I just stared at the kids, who couldn't even meet my eyes. My wife started talking fast, something about how she meant to tell me, how she'd been easing the kids into it, so they wouldn't be confused. She said Glenn, their real father, had changed and wanted to step up now. The laundry basket felt heavier and heavier until I set it on the floor. I asked her one question, how long? Her answer? Since before we got married. Like she was telling me she'd left the porch light on. I don't know how long I stood there. I remember hearing a car outside, wondering if that was him. If Glenn was about to walk through my front door and shake my hand like we were passing a football team's roster. My wife kept talking. I kept not listening. Eventually, I picked up my keys and said, "I'm going out." I didn't know then that going out meant I'd never step foot in that house again. I thought leaving was the hard part. I thought the silence afterward would be the worst. But what happened after that day, what they didn't see coming, was about to change everything, and not in the way they expected. When I closed the front door that day, it wasn't with a slam or a dramatic speech. It was with the quiet kind of finality that no one really takes seriously until it's too late. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't even grab my phone charger. I just walked out, got into my car, and drove until the gas light came on. My hands were gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles hurt, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Replaying her words, the kids' faces, and that awful, casual tone she used, like she'd been reading them bedtime stories about my replacement for months. I ended up at a rundown motel off the interstate, the kind with flickering neon signs and carpet that smells like old coffee. I paid cash, checked in, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the ugly floral curtains. The truth kept cycling through my head. Every school project I'd helped with, every late-night fever I'd sat through, every holiday where I thought we were a real family. And now I had to wonder, were they looking at me the whole time thinking, he's not really one of us? The next morning, I didn't call, and I didn't answer when she tried. She left a voicemail, her voice syrupy sweet, saying, "Everett, the kids are upset. You need to come home and talk to them." It didn't sound like an apology. It sounded like damage control, the kind of voice she used when explaining to her friends why she was letting me handle the finances while she handled real life. I decided to stay gone, not forever, just long enough for them to feel what my absence really meant. I thought maybe they'd call again. Maybe the kids would text. But as the days passed, the silence grew, and it was the wrong kind of silence. Not the silence of people missing you, the silence of people adjusting without you. By the 4th day, I found out why. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store, sipping burnt motel coffee, when I saw her. Marlene. She was pushing a cart, Glenn walking right beside her, laughing about something in that easy, comfortable way that couples do when they've been together for a long time. And then, like a punch to the gut, I saw my kids trailing behind them. Glenn was holding my son's hand. My daughter was carrying something Glenn had obviously bought for her. Something expensive, something I would have had to budget for. It was like I'd been erased in less than a week. Rewritten out of the story. I didn't go up to them. I didn't make a scene. I just watched from my car, every muscle in my body tense, feeling like I was looking at a family photo I'd somehow been cropped out of. That was the moment I realized that my quiet departure hadn't left them shaken. It had cleared the way for him. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't going to storm in and fight for what she'd already decided wasn't mine. No. I was going to do something else, something she would never see coming. Something that would make her wish she'd never chosen this truth-telling morning to end us. I sat in that car for almost an hour after they left the store, staring at the empty space where their SUV had been parked, trying to quiet the storm in my head. My first instinct was to follow them, not out of spite, but out of a pathetic, desperate need to know if this new family act continued once they were out of public view. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone, scrolled past all the missed calls and voicemails from Marlene, and landed on a number I hadn't dialed in years, my older brother, Dennis. Dennis and I have had our share of differences. He's blunt to the point of being abrasive, and I'd spent a good chunk of my marriage avoiding him because Marlene couldn't stand his negative energy. Translation: he never bought into her act. I didn't know exactly why I was calling him now, except that I needed a voice that didn't try to sugarcoat things or tell me to be the bigger person. When he picked up, his voice was cautious, like he wasn't sure if I'd butt dialed him. "Everett, this a mistake, or are you actually calling me?" I told him what had happened, not the softened version I'd given to a few mutual friends when I needed a couch to crash on, but the raw, ugly truth. I could hear him pacing on the other end, muttering curses under his breath. When I finally stopped talking, there was a pause. Then he said, "You know she's been laying the groundwork for this for a long time, right? This isn't sudden. This was planned." The word "planned" stuck in my throat. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. The signs had been there. The late nights, helping a friend move, the work dinners I was never invited to, the kids suddenly having fun days with someone I'd never met. I'd been the fool who thought trust was enough. Dennis didn't give me sympathy. Instead, he gave me an idea, one I hadn't even considered. "Everett, stop thinking like the wounded guy who got blindsided. Start thinking like someone they underestimated. If she's replaced you this fast, it's because she thinks you won't fight back in any way that matters." I told him I didn't want to fight. He told me it didn't have to be one, not the screaming, door-slamming kind. More like a quiet rearranging of the chessboard while they're too busy celebrating to notice. And that's when he mentioned something I'd almost forgotten: the savings account. Not the joint one, my own, the one I'd set up before I even met Marlene, the one she didn't have access to and had probably forgotten existed. That account wasn't huge, but it was enough to do something with. Enough to start over without begging anyone for help. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized starting over didn't have to mean disappearing into some one-bedroom apartment and licking my wounds. No, it could mean something bigger. By the time I hung up, I knew what my next move was. And for the first time since I walked out of that house, I felt the tiniest spark of control coming back. But that spark wouldn't stay small for long, because the next step I was about to take would put me right back in their orbit, and not for the reasons they'd expect. I didn't sleep much after that call with Dennis. My mind was running on this strange mix of dread and adrenaline, like I was about to walk into a room I'd been locked out of for years. The plan wasn't about revenge, at least not the messy, confrontational kind, but about making myself visible again in a way they couldn't ignore. If Marlene thought she could erase me quietly, she was about to learn that I could be just as quiet and twice as persistent. The first thing I did was pull up the calendar on my phone. I knew there were two events coming up that she couldn't resist parading around at: the fall school fundraiser and the community fair. Both were the perfect stage for her to play the part of devoted mother with her new and improved family lineup. I figured if I showed up at one of them, alone, calm, and put together, it wouldn't just catch her off guard. It would plant questions in the minds of everyone who'd heard her version of the story. So I spent the next week making changes. Small ones, but deliberate. I got a haircut from a place that didn't smell like disinfectant and old magazines. Bought a jacket that actually fit me instead of the baggy one Marlene always said was comfortable enough. I even pulled out my old camera, the expensive one I'd shoved in a closet after she said it was too much of a hobby for someone with real responsibilities, and started taking it with me everywhere. It wasn't about the photos. It was about walking into those events with something in my hands that made me look busy, confident, like I had my own purpose outside of their little bubble. The day of the fundraiser, I arrived early enough to blend in, but late enough to be noticed. I didn't hide in the back. I walked right up to the bake sale tables, chatted with parents I hadn't seen in months, and let my name slip into conversations without forcing it. People were friendly, but there was that subtle tilt of the head when they asked how I'd been. like they were trying to connect my presence with whatever Marlene had told them. I kept my answers light, vague, almost breezy. And then I saw them. Marlene, in her new dress that probably wasn't bought with her own money, standing next to Glenn like they'd been the PDA power couple for years. The kids were at their side, each holding some overpriced raffle ticket. She spotted me before Glenn did, and for a split second, her whole body stiffened. She recovered quickly, turning her head toward a group of parents, but I caught that flash of panic. Glenn noticed me next, his face unreadable, though I could tell he wasn't thrilled to see me smiling. I didn't approach them. I didn't even wave. I just moved around the room with my camera, snapping candid shots of kids playing, parents laughing, tables stacked with pies. Every so often, I'd catch one of the kids glancing at me. My daughter even gave me a small, uncertain smile before looking down at the floor. That one moment nearly broke me, but I forced myself to hold the line. By the time I left, I hadn't said a single word to Marlene or Glenn. But I knew I'd done what I came to do. I'd made it clear I wasn't gone. I wasn't erased. I still existed in their world, and I wasn't going to fade quietly into some forgotten corner. What I didn't know was that my quiet reappearance would ripple through their lives faster than I ever intended, and that Marlene herself would be the one to set the next part in motion. 3 days after the fundraiser, I was sitting in the small diner near the motel where I'd been staying, halfway through a plate of eggs I didn't even want, when the bell over the door rang, and in walked Marlene. No warning, no text beforehand, just her, like a storm cloud in the middle of my quiet morning. She scanned the room until her eyes locked on me, and there it was again, that flicker of tension she tried to hide behind a forced smile. She slid into the booth across from me without asking. The waitress, bless her heart, must have felt the tension because she didn't even bother with small talk, just poured Marlene some coffee and left us in silence. My first instinct was to get up and leave, but something in the way she sat, rigid, hands clasped too tightly around the mug, told me she wasn't here to play the calm, composed role she had at the fundraiser. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said finally, her voice low but sharp. "Showing up like that, taking pictures, making people ask questions. This isn't healthy for the kids." I wanted to laugh at the hypocrisy, but I didn't. Instead, I let her talk, watched her avoid my eyes every time she said Glenn's name. She claimed the kids were confused by my presence, that it was unfair to appear without warning after making the choice to leave. She kept circling the same point, that if I truly cared about their stability, I'd stay away. It was almost like she'd rehearsed it. I leaned back, folded my arms, and asked her the one thing I knew would catch her off guard. "Why does my being there bother you if I'm supposedly not their father?" That shut her up for a moment. She glanced out the window, took a sip of coffee she clearly didn't want, and muttered something about mixed signals. Then she dropped the real reason she'd come. Apparently, Glenn wasn't thrilled about my little reappearance either. He'd made comments about how involved I'd looked, how some people at the fundraiser seemed to treat me like family. According to Marlene, Glenn thought I was trying to undermine him, and she was here to give me a chance to clear the air before things got messy. The irony hit me so hard I almost smiled. They'd moved on without me in record time, erased me from their version of events, but the second I stepped back into the picture, calmly, without a scene, they felt threatened. It was proof I didn't have to yell, didn't have to fight. I just had to exist in their world again, unapologetically. Before she left, she leaned in and said, "Don't show up at the fair this weekend." "I mean it, Everett." I didn't answer. I just let her walk out, her words hanging in the air like a dare. And sitting there in that empty booth, I already knew I was going to take that dare. Not just show up, but make sure they remembered exactly why my absence had never been as harmless as they wanted to believe. The morning of the fair, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was eager to go, but because my mind wouldn't let me sleep. Marlene's warning replayed in my head like a broken record. "Don't show up at the fair this weekend." "I mean it, Everett." That alone was enough to guarantee I'd be there. But this wasn't about defiance for the sake of it. I knew from the look in her eyes at the diner that something about my presence unsettled her, and I wanted to know exactly what that was. I didn't dress for confrontation. I wore jeans, a clean button-up, and that new jacket I'd bought for the fundraiser. My old camera hung around my neck again, but this time, it wasn't just for show. I intended to capture the day, not just for me, but for anyone who'd ever heard only Marlene's side of the story. When I arrived, the place was already buzzing. Kids running from booth to booth, the smell of funnel cakes mixing with popcorn and grilled hot dogs. It didn't take long to spot them. Marlene was near the game stalls, laughing too loudly at something Glenn had said. She wore a sundress I'd never seen before, and I'd bet money he'd paid for it. The kids were darting around with plastic swords, their faces painted like tigers. For a few minutes, I stayed back, blending into the crowd, snapping candid shots of the event, the rides, the crowds, the prizes. I didn't aim my lens directly at them, not yet. I wanted them to notice me before I noticed them. Eventually, it happened. Glenn saw me first. His smile froze mid-sentence, and he nudged Marlene, who turned, following his gaze. There it was, the same stiffened posture, the same flash of unease. She whispered something to him, and he started walking toward me, his expression a forced mix of politeness and authority. "Everett," he said when he got close enough, "I think you know this isn't the place for whatever it is you're trying to do." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, then past him, where the kids were still playing, completely oblivious. "I'm here for the fair," I said finally. Same as everyone else. My tone was even, unshakable. He didn't like that. I could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. Marlene joined him a moment later, her smile so fake it could have been painted on. "You're making people uncomfortable," she said through clenched teeth. "Why can't you just let things be?" "Because things aren't what you say they are," I answered, still calm, still steady. Then, before either of them could stop me, I raised my camera and took a photo, not of them, but of the kids playing together in the sunlight, looking happy, unguarded. That single click made both of them flinch like I'd just crossed some invisible line. They didn't say another word, but I could feel their eyes on me for the rest of the day. I didn't cause a scene, didn't follow them, didn't interact with the kids directly. I just stayed present, visible, a quiet reminder that I wasn't gone and I wasn't forgotten. By the time I left, I knew I'd done more damage to their carefully curated story than any shouting match could have. And later that night, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I had a gut feeling that whatever was coming next was going to blow the lid off everything Marlene had tried to keep hidden. When the unknown number lit up my phone that night, I almost didn't answer. It was late, and I'd already convinced myself it was either a wrong number or Marlene using someone else's phone to corner me again. But something made me swipe the screen. The voice on the other end wasn't hers, and it wasn't Glenn's either. It was a woman I didn't recognize, speaking in a careful, almost hesitant tone. "Is this Everett? I think we need to talk. It's about Marlene and Glenn." That was all it took to get my attention. She said her name was Linda, and she lived in the same neighborhood as Marlene's parents. She didn't waste much time with pleasantries. According to her, she'd seen things, heard things, that made her believe Marlene's little truth about the kids wasn't the whole truth at all. She'd kept quiet because she didn't want to get dragged into family drama. But seeing me at the fair had changed her mind. Her words came fast, like she was trying to unload a secret before she lost her nerve. She told me she'd overheard a heated argument between Marlene and her mother months ago. In it, Marlene admitted Glenn hadn't been in the picture when the kids were born, not in any real way. He'd been gone for years, and there was another man, someone else entirely, who might actually be their biological father. Glenn didn't know. The kids didn't know, and I sure as hell hadn't known. I sat there in my dim motel room, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the floor tilt under me. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was layers of it, stacked high enough to crush everyone underneath. If Linda was telling the truth, then Marlene had built her whole narrative on a lie even Glenn didn't see coming. Which meant my quiet appearances at the fundraiser and the fair hadn't just threatened their happy new family act. They'd been jabbing at a weak spot I didn't even know existed. I asked Linda why she was telling me now, and her answer was simple. "Because you still care about those kids, whether they're yours by blood or not. And I think they deserve to know who they really are. But you can't go in swinging. You have to be smart about this." She gave me just enough details to start connecting dots I hadn't even known were there. Names, dates, a timeline that didn't match anything Marlene had ever told me. When we hung up, I just sat there in the silence, the weight of it pressing down on me. For the first time since walking out of that house, I wasn't just reacting to what they'd done. I had information they didn't know I had. And if I played it right, it could change everything. Not just for me, but for the kids, and even for Glenn. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what Linda had said, that I had to be smart. She was right. This wasn't about barging in with accusations. This was about choosing the exact moment to let the truth slip through the cracks, right when Marlene thought she'd sealed them for good. And the perfect opportunity was coming faster than she could imagine. The perfect opportunity came 2 weeks later at the school's fall concert. I knew Marlene wouldn't miss it. Anything that let her stand in front of an audience and look like the model parent was her kind of stage. I walked in quietly, camera over my shoulder, blending into the rows of folding chairs until I found a seat a few rows behind them. Glenn was there, his arm draped casually over the back of Marlene's chair, the kids fidgeting beside them in their matching outfits. The performance itself was sweet. Off-key singing, shy smiles, kids waving at parents in the crowd. But the moment that mattered came afterward, when everyone spilled into the lobby for cookies and cider. That's when I saw my chance. Glenn stepped away to talk to another dad, leaving Marlene alone. I didn't confront her, didn't raise my voice. I just leaned in and, in the calmest tone I could manage, said, "You might want to tell Glenn who their father really is before someone else does." Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't stick around for the scramble. I just gave her a small nod, turned, and went to find the kids. I didn't tell them anything complicated, just that I was proud of them, that I'd always be there if they needed me. My daughter hugged me without hesitation, and for the first time in months, it felt like something real was still there. A week later, I heard from Linda again. Word had gotten back to her that Glenn had confronted Marlene, and the fallout was loud. But the part that mattered to me most was this. Glenn still wanted to be in the kids' lives, but so did I. And for the first time, Marlene wasn't standing in the way. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the weight of too many lies collapsing at once. Whatever it was, she agreed that I could see them regularly. No conditions. No fake smiles. It's not the picture-perfect ending I once imagined, but it's better than the silence. I'm not erased, I'm not replaced, and I didn't have to burn everything down to get here. The kids know I'm still their dad in all the ways that matter, and that's enough for me. So that's my story. If you've made it this far, I'm curious, what moment in this whole mess would have been the breaking point for you? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget, you're watching Reddit Confessions, where the truth always finds its way out.